The wrench slipped from his hand when the first drone began to fall. He didn't look up right away. The sound told him enough. Not the sharp crack of metal getting out. Not a clean drop. It was a stagger in the air. A machine trying to correct something it didn't understand. He felt it in his chest before anyone else noticed. The others kept laughing about something near the loading bay. The sky above the hangar flickered with evening light, and the drone tilted again. Wrong angle, wrong correction, nose hunting for balance it wasn't going to find. He knew that pattern. He had seen it once before, far from here. Different desert, different stakes. His hands were already moving before he let himself think about why. He had promised he wouldn't. Marcus had been tightening bolts on a ceiling panel when the drone dipped. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a stutter, a hesitation in the air like a bird catching an unexpected gust. The drone's rotors didn't scream or grind. They adjusted too smoothly, which was almost worse. The machine thought it was fine. He stood still with the wrench in his hand. Nobody else reacted. Down on the hangar floor, two technicians were leaning against a crate of spare batteries, talking about weekend plans. Someone in logistics rolled a pallet jack across the concrete. The usual noises carried on, casual and careless. Marcus stared up. The drone was one of the new ones. Mid-size cargo model. White shell, black undercarriage, clean branding along the side like it was supposed to make it feel safe. It hovered near the hangar doors, waiting for a signal to descend into the loading lane. It drifted left, corrected. Drifted again, not wind. The hangar doors were only half open. The air inside was still. The drone wasn't fighting the environment. It was fighting itself. Marcus's jaw tightened. His fingers curled around the wrench until his knuckles went pale. He didn't mean to do it. It happened the way breathing happens. His body made the decision before his mind signed off. He climbed down the ladder. The metal rungs were cold, even through his gloves. He moved faster than he should have for a maintenance worker, fast enough that the guy in logistics glanced at him. Marcus didn't meet his eyes. He crossed the hangar floor and stopped under the drone's flight lane. The drone hovered 15 feet up. Its cargo clamps were empty, but it still weighed enough to kill someone if it dropped wrong. It dipped again. This time, one rotor lagged by half a beat. Barely visible. But Marcus saw it. He could almost feel the vibration in his teeth. He looked toward the nearest console station. A junior operator sat there with a headset on, watching a tablet. The operator's posture was loose, relaxed. The way people sat when they trusted the software more than their own attention. Marcus walked over. The operator glanced up. "You need something?" Marcus's voice came out rougher than he intended. "That unit's unstable." The operator frowned. "Which one?" Marcus pointed. The operator turned back to his tablet. He tapped a few times. "Telemetry's green. It's fine." Marcus watched the drone through the open hangar. It wobbled again, then stabilized in a way that didn't look like stability. It looked like compensation. A fix on top of a fix. Marcus leaned closer to the tablet. He shouldn't have. He knew that. The tablet was logged in under someone else's credentials. Company policy didn't like people hovering over controls. Company policy liked compliance. Quiet. Stay in your lane. He didn't care. "Pull its altitude log," Marcus said. The operator blinked. Why?" Marcus's mouth went dry. He could hear his own heartbeat. The hangar felt louder than it had a minute ago. The scrape of wheels on concrete, the chatter, the distant hum of other drones moving through their routes. He kept his face still. "Because it's hunting," he said. The operator stared at him like Marcus had spoken another language. "It's not, it's just holding position." Marcus didn't argue. He reached out and tapped the screen himself. The operator jerked his hand away. "Hey!" Marcus ignored him. He moved through the menus like he'd used the interface before. His fingers were steady. Too steady. The kind of steadiness that didn't come from maintenance work. He pulled up the altitude variation graph. A thin line, almost flat, but not flat enough. There were micro dips, repeating. Every few seconds. Marcus stared at the pattern. The repetition wasn't random. It wasn't sensor noise. It was a correction loop. His throat tightened. He'd seen that loop in another system years ago. Not drones, not cargo units. Something faster, something armed, something that didn't get second chances. He felt a faint pressure behind his eyes, like a headache forming. The operator leaned in, annoyed. "Dude, you're not supposed to." "Kill it," Marcus said. The operator scoffed. "What? No. It's in active lane." Marcus turned and looked at him. Not hard, not threatening, just direct. The operator stopped talking. Marcus didn't like the way that worked. He didn't like how easily the kid went quiet, like his body understood Marcus before his brain did. Marcus had spent years sanding that edge down, making himself small, making himself harmless. It was still there. The drone dipped again, this time sharper. A couple of workers finally looked up. Someone laughed and said, "Yo, is it drunk?" Marcus didn't laugh. He leaned back toward the tablet. His finger hovered over the emergency override. It required a code. He didn't have one. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the locked screen, feeling something ugly rise in his chest. Not fear, not panic, anger. Not at the drone, at the people who built it like this, at the company that treated human judgment like an inconvenience, at himself for being here at all. The drone wobbled again, and this time it drifted toward the hangar doors, toward the fuel storage lane. Marcus saw the future of it in a single clean image, the drone clipping the door frame, the rotor snapping, the body spiraling, metals slamming into a fuel canister, fire blooming across the concrete, screaming, chaos. He didn't want to see that again. He stepped away from the operator's station and walked toward the manual control rig on the far wall. It was meant for training and testing. A backup system, old-school joystick, physical controls, a station nobody used unless a supervisor demanded a demo. It was covered in dust. Marcus wiped his hand across the panel and felt the grit under his palm. A few heads turned as he moved. People were starting to notice the drone now. The wobble was more obvious, the corrections more violent. Someone shouted, "Hey, can someone bring it down?" Marcus didn't answer. He sat at the manual rig and flipped the cover open. The power light blinked red, no active connection. He reached behind the panel, found the auxiliary cable and yanked it free. His movements were quick, efficient. Like he'd done it 100 times. Maybe he had. The cable clicked into place. The console came alive with a soft hum. Screens lit up. The interface loaded. The operator at the tablet station stood up, alarmed. "Hey!" "Who authorized?" Marcus didn't look at him. He scanned the screen. Found the unit ID. Locked onto its signal. His hands rested on the controls. For a moment, he didn't move. He breathed in slowly through his nose. The air smelled like oil and metal and faint electrical heat. Familiar smells. Safe smells. The kind of smells that meant you were still in a world where things could be fixed. He exhaled. Then he took control. The drone responded immediately, like it had been waiting for someone to stop letting it argue with itself. Marcus eased the throttle down, gentle, not too fast. The rotors whined slightly as they adjusted. The drone steadied. A hush fell over the hangar. Even the joking stopped. Marcus felt every eye on him, though he didn't turn. He kept his gaze locked on the screen. The drone descended in slow increments. 12 feet, 10, 8. Its wobble tried to return. He compensated before it could. The correction was instinctive, small movements, tiny adjustments, the kind that weren't taught in manuals, the kind you learned when mistakes meant bodies. The drone lowered to 5 feet above the ground. Marcus held it there. His pulse was steady now, which bothered him. It felt too natural, too easy, like he'd stepped back into an old skin. He brought it down the rest of the way. The landing skids touched concrete with a soft clack. Silence. Marcus's hand stayed on the controls for another second, just in case. Then he powered the unit down. The hangar exhaled. Someone behind him said, "What the hell?" Marcus didn't move right away. He stared at the dead drone on the screen. Its status indicator blinked yellow now. Warning. Fault detected. He swallowed. He felt the weight of what he'd just done settling into the room. Not the save. The exposure. He stood up slowly and stepped away from the console. When he turned, the operator was staring at him like he just watched a stranger walk out of a burning building without a scratch. The operator's mouth opened, then closed. Marcus walked back toward his ladder. He kept his shoulders relaxed. He kept his face blank. He tried to put the mask back on, but he could feel the eyes following him. People were whispering now, quiet, fast, the kind of whispers that didn't die out, the kind that grew legs. He climbed the ladder again and went back to the ceiling panel like nothing had happened. His hand shook when he picked up the wrench. Not because of the drone, because he knew what came next. A supervisor would ask questions. Security would pull footage. Someone would want to know why a maintenance worker could fly a drone like that. Someone would want to know why he reacted before anyone else even understood there was a problem. Marcus tightened the bolt too hard. The metal groaned. He stopped and loosened it. He forced himself to breathe. The hangar had returned to its noise, but it was different now, like the sound was thinner, like something had cracked underneath it. Marcus stared at the ceiling panel, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing a different sky, a different machine falling. In the moment years ago when he had made a promise to himself, standing alone in a place no one would ever name, that he was done, that he would never touch that world again. And now, without thinking, he heard footsteps below. Heavy ones. Not the casual shuffle of technicians. Deliberate. Marcus didn't look down. He waited. A voice called up. Marcus didn't look down. He waited. A voice called up. Marcus, get down here. He recognized the voice. Greg Haldane, floor supervisor. Ex-military type who loved rules because they gave him something to lean on. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second, then he opened them and started climbing down. Each rung felt slower than before. When his boots hit the ground, Greg was standing there with his arms crossed. His face wasn't angry yet, it was curious. And that was worse. Greg glanced at the powered-down drone sitting on the concrete, then back at Marcus. You want to explain, Greg said, why you were on the manual control rig? Marcus wiped his hands on his work pants. He didn't answer immediately. He made himself pause like a normal person would, like someone thinking, not someone calculating. He kept his voice low. It was unstable, Marcus said. Greg's eyes narrowed. The operator didn't flag it. Marcus shrugged slightly. The operator wasn't watching. A couple of technicians nearby pretended not to listen. They were listening anyway. Greg took a step closer. Marcus could smell coffee on his breath. You trained for that? Greg asked. Marcus met his eyes. For a moment, the hangar felt like it had no air in it. Marcus could have lied. He could have made something up. He could have laughed it off. But Greg's stare wasn't casual. It wasn't workplace curiosity. It was the look of someone who had been around dangerous people before and had just realized he might be standing next to one. Marcus spoke carefully. A little, he said. Greg didn't smile. A little where? Marcus didn't answer. The silence stretched. Greg's jaw worked as if he was chewing on something he didn't like. Then he nodded toward the office doors. Come with me, he said. Marcus didn't argue. He followed. As they walked, he passed the drone again. Its shell was clean, almost pretty. It sat there harmless now, like it hadn't almost dropped out of the air, like it hadn't almost dragged him back into a life he'd buried. Greg opened the office door and held it for him. Marcus stepped inside. The air in the office smelled like printer ink and stale air conditioning. The walls were covered in safety posters and efficiency charts. Human faces reduced to numbers and reminders. Greg shut the door behind them. The click of the latch sounded final. Greg leaned back against his desk, arms still crossed. Look, he said. Quieter now. That was impressive, but it's also a problem. Marcus didn't react. Greg continued. You're not certified for manual override. You're not in flight operations. You're maintenance. You understand what that means? Marcus nodded once. Greg studied him. Then he said, "Who are you, Marcus?" Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A small tightening. A warning. Because Greg wasn't asking as a supervisor anymore. He was asking like a man who sensed a story underneath the silence. Marcus kept his face calm. But inside, something old stirred awake. Something that didn't like questions. Something that didn't like being cornered. Greg waited. Marcus opened his mouth. And for a second he almost told the truth. Almost. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared at the safety posters behind Greg's desk. A smiling man in a hard hat giving a thumbs up. A slogan about accountability. Another one about zero incidents. The kind of words people liked because they sounded clean. Greg's office was small. Too warm. The air didn't move. There was a window, but the blinds were half shut like the room didn't trust daylight. Greg waited. Marcus could feel his own pulse in his throat. Not fast, just present, like a clock ticking somewhere you couldn't reach. He forced his shoulders to loosen. "I'm nobody," Marcus said. Greg gave a short laugh, but it didn't hold any humor. "That's not true." Marcus said nothing. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus could hear the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. He hated that sound. It made the room feel temporary, like it could disappear at any moment. Greg pushed off the desk and walked around to his chair. He didn't sit. He picked up a folder and flipped it open, even though Marcus knew it wasn't his file. Greg just needed something to do with his hands. "You know how many people here even know that rig exists?" Greg asked. Marcus didn't respond. Greg kept going. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask. You didn't even look like you were thinking. You moved like you've been waiting for it." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Not because Greg was wrong, because he was right. Marcus looked down at his hands. His nails were dirty from work, grease stains in the creases. It should have made him look ordinary. It should have made him believable. But his hands didn't feel ordinary. They felt like tools. Greg's voice lowered. "You were in the service?" Marcus's eyes stayed on the floor. If he answered that, even a little, it opened the wrong door. He could already see what would happen. HR questions. Background checks. Corporate security. Some executive who'd never stepped onto the hangar floor wanting to know why a man like him was changing light fixtures for a living. He didn't want that kind of attention. He had built his whole life around avoiding it. Marcus lifted his gaze and met Greg's eyes again. "I did some contracting work, years ago." Greg's face tightened, like he didn't buy it but didn't know how to challenge it. "What kind?" Greg asked. Marcus didn't blink, the kind that doesn't matter anymore. Greg stared at him. Then his eyes flicked down to Marcus's work badge clipped to his belt. The photo was old, taken when Marcus still had a softer face before the years settled into his jaw. Greg nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. "You understand," Greg said, "that the drone was green in the system." Marcus exhaled through his nose. "Then the system is wrong." Greg's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. It faded quickly. "You saying our fleet management software is wrong?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He could still see the drone dipping. The micro variations in the altitude graph. The clean, repeating pattern. The machine making the same mistake over and over because no one had taught it how to stop. "It's not seeing something," Marcus said, "or it's seeing it and ignoring it." Greg stared at him. "You're telling me the drone almost crashed?" Marcus nodded once. Greg's expression hardened now. Not suspicion, concern. The kind that came when someone realized the joke was over. He walked to the window and pulled the blinds up a few inches. Light spilled across the desk. He watched the hangar for a moment. People moving around. The drone sitting dead in its lane like an animal that had been tranquilized. Greg turned back. "You didn't report anything," Greg said. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I just stopped it." Greg shook his head slowly. "That's not how it works here. There's protocol." Marcus didn't say what he wanted to say. That protocol was how people died. He kept his voice even. "You can file the report." Greg held his stare. You think I'm going to file a report that says my maintenance guy hijacked flight controls? Marcus didn't flinch. You can say I acted without authorization. That would be true. Greg's eyes narrowed. And you're fine with that? Marcus shrugged. The motion felt stiff. Greg studied him like he was weighing something. Then he walked back to his desk and finally sat down. His chair creaked. Marcus, he said, quieter now. Look, I'm not trying to screw you, but if that drone was unstable, it's a bigger problem than you. Marcus felt a dull heaviness settle behind his ribs. He knew. That's why he moved. Greg leaned forward. I need to know what you saw. Marcus hesitated. The words were there, but he had to translate them into something that didn't sound like a mission briefing. It was in a correction loop, Marcus said. Altitude microdips, rotor lag. It was compensating wrong. Greg stared at him, then looked down at his desk like he needed to pretend he understood. Okay. Marcus could tell Greg didn't really get it, but he didn't need to. Greg asked, could it happen again? Marcus didn't answer quickly. He thought of the fleet. Dozens of drones. Hundreds. Some of them carrying cargo, some carrying medical shipments. Some flying routes over neighborhoods. If one had the bug, others might too. Marcus said, yes. Greg exhaled and rubbed his forehead. Jesus. He looked up. We've got a quarterly audit next week. Corporate's already crawling around. If there's a system flaw, Marcus cut in, then it needs to be fixed. Greg's eyes sharpened. You don't get it. If we flag a major flaw, they shut operations down. They lose contracts. People get fired. They don't thank you for honesty, Marcus. They bury it. Marcus didn't move. The anger rose again, slow and familiar. Not explosive, just heavy. Like a stone you carried too long. He kept his voice level. Then burying it will kill someone. Greg stared at him for a long moment. The room was quiet enough that Marcus could hear the faint buzz of radios outside. Someone calling out a bay number. Someone laughing again like the world hadn't changed. Greg's eyes dropped to the folder on his desk. He tapped it once. You know what's funny? Greg said. Marcus waited. Greg's voice sounded tired now. The guys upstairs are always talking about automation like it's God. Like it can't be wrong. Like human error is the only danger. Marcus didn't respond, but his face tightened. Greg leaned back in his chair, and then a drone almost falls out of the sky. And the only reason it doesn't is because the quiet maintenance guy knows exactly what to do. Marcus swallowed. He felt exposed. Not in a dramatic way. In a slow, humiliating way. Like being stripped of privacy piece by piece. Greg's eyes stayed on him. You have any idea what kind of attention that draws? Marcus nodded once. Greg sighed. I'm going to have to tell someone. Marcus's stomach dropped slightly. He didn't show it. Who? Marcus asked. Greg hesitated. Facility manager. Maybe flight ops lead. I can't just pretend this didn't happen. Marcus felt a cold pressure settle in his chest. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the old instinct that came before things went bad. He said quietly, Greg, don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Greg's gaze snapped up. That a threat? Marcus's face tightened. He shook his head once, immediately. No, Marcus said. It's not. I'm telling you what happens when people start digging. Greg held his stare. What happens? Marcus paused. He could hear his own breath. He hated how careful he had to be. Every word felt like it could ruin the life he'd built. Not just his job. Everything. The small apartment, the quiet evenings, the phone calls with his sister, the way he could walk into a grocery store and not feel watched. He had built peace out of silence. I leave, Marcus said. Greg blinked. You'll quit, Marcus nodded. Greg sat still for a second. Then he let out a short breath and shook his head, almost irritated. That's your solution? Just run? Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Greg didn't understand what running meant to Marcus. Running wasn't cowardice. It was survival. It was how you kept the past from catching up. It was how you kept the people around you from getting burned. Greg leaned forward again. You're telling me you can stop these failures, and your plan is to disappear? Marcus stared at him. He wanted to tell Greg that stopping failures was what had ruined him in the first place, that every time he'd been useful, people had taken more missions, more risk, more responsibility, more blood. Instead, he said, I'm not your solution. Greg's eyes narrowed. Then what are you? Marcus didn't answer. Greg pushed back his chair and stood up again. He walked toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the knob. I'm going to do this the right way, Greg said. Marcus felt his throat tighten. His body went still. Greg looked back at him. But I'm not going to throw you under the bus. Marcus didn't trust that. Greg might mean it, but meaning didn't matter once corporate got involved. Greg opened the door. The hangar noise spilled in like a wave. Go back to work, Greg said, and don't touch that rig again. Marcus nodded. He stepped out into the hangar. The light outside felt harsher now, the air colder. People were still moving around, but Marcus could feel their attention like heat on his skin. A few workers glanced at him and looked away too fast. Someone muttered, That's the guy. Marcus walked back toward his ladder. He didn't hurry. He forced himself to move at the pace of someone with nothing to hide. But inside, his mind was already working. He needed to leave. Not tonight. Not in a rush. That drew suspicion. But soon. He climbed the ladder again and picked up the wrench. His hands were steadier now, but his stomach felt hollow. He tightened another bolt. Slowly. Carefully. Then another. He tried to focus on the work, but his thoughts kept drifting. He thought about his sister. The last voicemail she'd left. Asking if he was coming by on Sunday. Telling him she'd made too much food again. Telling him not to bring anything. He thought about the promise he'd made to her without saying it out loud. That he was safe now. That he wasn't going to disappear again. Below him, the drone was being rolled onto a diagnostic platform. 2 technicians were poking at it, laughing like it was a stubborn appliance. Marcus watched them from the corner of his eye. They didn't know what they were touching. He tightened one more bolt and paused, listening. He could hear voices near the office area. Greg talking to someone. The facility manager, maybe. The tone was low, serious. Marcus's chest tightened. He kept working, but he already knew the day was over. Not his shift. His cover. Because once people started asking why Marcus could do what he did, they wouldn't stop at the drone. They'd ask where he learned it. They'd ask what else he could do. And eventually, someone would find the truth. Not because they cared about him, because companies didn't let useful things stay hidden. Marcus stared at the ceiling panel. His reflection faintly stirred back from the metal surface. Older eyes than the ones in his badge photo. Eyes that looked tired, but not soft. He swallowed and went back to work. He didn't allow himself to look down again, because he could feel it already. The attention turning, like a spotlight slowly warming up. The next morning, nothing looked different. That was the first thing that unsettled him. The hangar doors rolled open at 7:00 a.m. sharp. The coffee machine sputtered in the break corner. Drones lifted in quiet sequence, one after another, smooth and obedient. If someone had walked in fresh, they would have thought yesterday had been routine. Marcus clocked in without speaking. He kept his head down, same as always. Same worn boots, same gray maintenance shirt. His name stitched over the pocket like it belonged there. He felt eyes on him anyway. Not obvious, not open staring, just the kind of glances people give when something doesn't fit anymore. He moved through his checklist. Battery rack inspection, cable integrity scan, ceiling track lubrication, ordinary things. His hands knew the motions, the rhythm steadied him. Halfway through the morning shift, he noticed something else. 2 men near the far loading bay. Not regular floor staff. They wore company badges, but not the kind that got smudged with grease. Clean jackets, tablets in hand, watching more than working. Audit team. Greg had said next week. Apparently next week meant now. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He didn't look at them again. Looking made things real. A drone passed overhead. Stable. Level. Predictable. He didn't trust it. He walked past the diagnostic platform where yesterday's drone sat partially disassembled. Its casing was off. Internal wiring exposed like ribs. One of the younger techs, Dylan, was leaning over it with a multimeter. "Hey," Dylan said casually, not looking up. "They're saying you flew this thing down like some kind of hero." Marcus didn't stop walking. "I landed it." Dylan snorted. "Same difference." Marcus didn't respond. Dylan glanced up now. "Flight ops pulled the logs. System says it was fine." Marcus paused then. "Just for a second." "And?" he asked. "And nothing," Dylan said. "They ran diagnostics overnight. No hardware faults. No rotor lag flagged. It's clean." Marcus stared at the exposed drone. Clean. He felt something cold move through him. "Did they check the correction loop parameters?" Marcus asked. Dylan frowned. "The what?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "The autopilot adjustment cycle. Micro-altitude compensation." Dylan shrugged. "I don't know, man. That's software. We don't mess with that." Marcus nodded once and walked away. That was the problem. Nobody messed with it. The software was treated like it couldn't be wrong. Hardware could fail. Humans could fail. But code was logic. Logic didn't lie. Marcus reached the far end of the hangar and grabbed a rag from a supply bin. He wiped his hands slowly, though they weren't dirty. He thought about the altitude graph again. The repeating dips. If diagnostics didn't catch it, then the thresholds were wrong. Or someone had widened them. His chest tightened. That wasn't random failure. That was tolerance. He heard footsteps behind him. "Greg." Marcus didn't turn immediately. "Walk with me," Greg said quietly. Marcus tossed the rag back into the bin and fell into step beside him. They didn't head toward the office this time. They walked along the outer wall of the hangar, away from most of the noise. Greg kept his voice low. "Corporate sent 2 flight systems analysts." Marcus nodded once. "They reviewed yesterday's incident," Greg continued. "Official position is that there was no critical instability." Marcus said nothing. Greg glanced at him. "They're calling it operator overcorrection during automated hover." Marcus stopped walking. Greg took another step before realizing Marcus wasn't beside him anymore. Marcus looked toward the center of the hangar where drones were lifting in steady rhythm. "Operator overcorrection," Marcus repeated. Greg rubbed his jaw. "Meaning the system reacted to minor turbulence within acceptable parameters." Marcus felt heat build under his skin. "There was no turbulence," he said. Greg shrugged helplessly. "That's what the data says." Marcus stared at him. "Data says what it's told to say." Greg's eyes narrowed slightly. "Careful." Marcus forced himself to breathe. He lowered his voice. If the tolerance window was expanded, it wouldn't flag the loop. Greg held his gaze. "You suggesting someone adjusted system sensitivity?" Marcus didn't answer directly. He looked past Greg at the audit team near the loading bay. One of them was watching a drone ascend while tapping notes into his tablet. "I'm suggesting," Marcus said slowly, "that the system might be grading itself on a curve." Greg studied him. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if he'd said too much. Finally, Greg said, "You have proof?" Marcus shook his head. "Then it's speculation," Greg replied. Marcus nodded. "Yes." Greg exhaled. "Look, they want to talk to you." Marcus felt something drop inside his stomach. "Why?" he asked. Greg gave him a look. "Because you manually intervened in what they're calling a non-issue." Marcus didn't speak. Greg added, "They think you panicked." That almost made Marcus laugh. "Almost. I didn't panic," Marcus said. "I know," Greg replied quietly. They stood there for a moment. The hangar hummed round them. Machines lifting, doors opening, radios crackling. Greg shifted his weight. "Meetings in 20 minutes." Marcus nodded once. He didn't ask if he could refuse. Refusing would only confirm interest. He walked to the break area and poured himself water from the cooler. His hands were steady again. That bothered him. He should have felt nervous. Instead, he felt alert, like before a briefing. He hated that feeling. He sat down alone at one of the plastic tables. The chair creaked under his weight. Across the room, two mechanics whispered while pretending not to look at him. Marcus kept his eyes on the water in his cup. He had wanted this life because it was small. Predictable shifts, predictable problems, replace parts, tighten bolts, go home. No one died if you misjudged a bolt. At least not immediately. He thought about the analysts upstairs reviewing logs, graphs on screens, clean numbers, rounded edges. He knew how those rooms worked. He had sat in rooms like that once, watching footage frame by frame, adjusting parameters until the narrative fit the outcome. He felt a dull ache behind his eyes. He didn't want to be pulled back into that world of explanations and justifications. He heard Greg's voice from the doorway. "They're ready." Marcus stood. The walk to the conference room felt longer than it was. The room itself was glass-walled, overlooking the hangar floor, transparent in a way that felt like a lie. Two analysts sat at the table, late 30s maybe, clean shirts, company logos stitched neatly over their chests. One of them looked up as Marcus entered. "Marcus Reed?" the man asked. Marcus nodded. "Have a seat." Marcus sat. The chair was too soft. The second analyst slid a tablet across the table. "We reviewed yesterday's event. Can you explain why you initiated manual override?" Marcus looked at the tablet, but didn't touch it. "The drone was unstable," he said. The first analyst tapped the screen. A graph appeared. Clean, smooth, mostly flat. "According to telemetry," the analyst said, "altitude variation remained within acceptable margins." Marcus studied the graph. They'd smoothed it. He could see it immediately. The micro variations were there, but dampened, averaged out. He leaned back slightly. "You're averaging the dips," Marcus said. The two analysts exchanged a glance. "We use rolling median smoothing to eliminate sensor noise," the second one replied. Marcus nodded slowly. "And you widen the tolerance window to account for wind variability," he added. The first analyst's eyes sharpened. "That's standard for this model." Marcus held his gaze. "How wide?" The analyst hesitated half a second. Marcus saw it. That half second was everything. "Within safe operating limits," the analyst said. Marcus leaned forward slightly now. "Safe according to what?" The room felt smaller. The second analyst spoke carefully. "Are you questioning our safety protocols?" Marcus met his eyes. "I'm questioning your assumptions." Silence settled over the table. Outside the glass wall, a drone lifted and hovered smoothly. It looked perfect from here. The first analyst folded his hands. "Mr. Reed, your intervention caused an unscheduled interruption in operations. It triggered review procedures. We need to understand whether your assessment was based on training or intuition." Marcus paused. There it was. Training. He felt the old walls inside him rise automatically. "It was based on observation," he said. The analyst tilted his head. "You identified a correction loop anomaly without access to back-end diagnostics." Marcus didn't respond. The analyst continued. "That suggests prior experience with similar systems." Marcus kept his voice neutral. "Machines repeat themselves. People don't notice." The second analyst leaned back in his chair. "Where did you learn that?" Marcus felt the weight of the question settle in the room. He could lie. He had lied before, many times. But lying here would invite more digging. He chose a smaller truth. "I worked with autonomous platforms before," he said. The analysts waited. "In what capacity?" the first asked. Marcus's fingers rested lightly on the table. "Field support," he said. That wasn't false. It just wasn't complete. The analysts exchanged another look. The second one nodded slightly, like he'd confirmed a theory. "We'd like you to sit in on further diagnostics this afternoon," the first analyst said. "Purely observational." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Observational. That's how it started. He nodded once. "Fine," he said. The meeting ended shortly after. Marcus stepped back onto the hangar floor and felt the weight of the glass wall behind him. He didn't look back at the conference room. He knew they were watching him through it. And for the first time since he'd taken this job, Marcus understood something clearly. He hadn't just exposed his past. He had stepped into a space the company didn't realize it needed, and companies didn't let go of things they needed. He walked back toward his station slowly. The drones above him looked steady, but he didn't trust them. Not anymore, and he didn't trust the people who believed the numbers more than the sky. He felt the old world pressing closer. Not loud, just patient, waiting to see what he would do next. The diagnostics lab was colder than the hangar. Not temperature exactly, the air conditioning hummed the same, but the room felt sealed off from consequence. No grease, no noise, just screens and soft light and rows of chairs positioned to face a wall of data. Marcus stood near the back at first. The two analysts from the morning were there, along with a flight operations supervisor and someone from software engineering who looked irritated about being pulled in. On the central screen, yesterday's drone hovered in replay. Clean lines, clean numbers. Marcus kept his hands in his pockets. Rolling back the smoothing filter, the software engineer said, tapping commands into a console. The graph shifted. It became jagged, more honest. There. The dips were visible now. Small, repeating, almost polite. One of the analysts cleared his throat. Still within tolerance. Marcus didn't speak. The software engineer zoomed in further. The pattern tightened. A dip. Correction. Slight overshoot. Correction again. Each cycle shaving off a little more stability. The room grew quieter. Rotor response latency, the flight ops supervisor asked. Nominee, the engineer replied. No mechanical lag. Marcus stepped forward without meaning to. It's not mechanical, he said. All eyes turned to him. He ignored that and focused on the screen. The correction timing is off by milliseconds, Marcus continued. The system thinks it's compensating for wind, but there's no wind input. The engineer frowned. Environmental feed was clear. Marcus nodded. Exactly. The analyst folded his arms. So what's triggering it? Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to say it out loud. Saying it made it solid, but they were staring at him now like he'd already taken responsibility. Sensor fusion drift, Marcus said quietly. The engineer's posture changed. Less irritated now. More alert. Explain, he said. Marcus stepped closer to the console. He didn't ask permission. The altitude sensor and the inertial measurement unit aren't agreeing, he said. Not enough to flag an error, just enough to start a quiet argument. The engineer typed quickly, pulling up additional telemetry. Marcus pointed at the screen. See that? He said. Micro-divergence every 3 seconds. The engineer squinted, then leaned in. Huh. The flight ops supervisor shifted. Is that dangerous? Marcus kept his eyes on the data. It becomes dangerous if the loop tightens. How tight? One of the analysts asked. Marcus thought about how to answer that without sounding like he'd seen it happen before. Tight enough, he said. The room was still. The engineer ran another simulation. The drone model on the screen began hovering in a virtual environment. He adjusted a parameter slightly. The model wobbled. He adjusted it again. The wobble grew sharper. The engineer stopped the simulation. He looked at Marcus. Where did you say you worked? He asked. Marcus felt the question land heavy in his stomach. Contract work, he said. The engineer held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly. One of the analysts spoke carefully. Even if there's minor sensor drift, the expanded tolerance window accounts for that. Marcus finally turned to face him fully. That window is the problem, Marcus said. The analyst's expression tightened. The window prevents false positives. It also prevents real ones, Marcus replied. Silence. The engineer cleared his throat. If we narrow tolerance, we increase alert frequency. That means more manual overrides, slower operations. Marcus nodded. Yes. The flight ops supervisor crossed his arms, which means missed delivery targets. Marcus looked at him. And fewer falling drones, Marcus said. The room shifted slightly after that. Not dramatic, just subtle. The weight of the argument moved. The analysts exchanged another look. One of them said, We can't overhaul fleet parameters based on one anomaly. Marcus felt the frustration rise again. He kept it contained. It wasn't random, he said. It was patterned. The engineer was already pulling up additional fleet logs. Let's check similar models, he muttered. Minutes passed in focused silence. Marcus stood back again, letting them work. One by one, small micro-dips appeared in other drones' logs, not identical, not synchronized, but similar. The engineer leaned back slowly in his chair. Well, he said quietly. The analyst's jaw tightened. How widespread, he asked. The engineer scrolled. Hard to say without deeper analysis. Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Not relief. Confirmation. The system wasn't perfect. It never had been. The analyst turned toward Marcus. Why didn't this show up in automated diagnostics? Marcus answered without hesitation. Because you taught it not to see itself. The words hung there. The engineer looked at Marcus again, this time with something like respect. The analyst didn't look pleased. We'll escalate this to senior leadership, he said. Marcus's stomach tightened. Escalate. He stepped back toward the door. The engineer noticed. You leaving? Marcus nodded. You don't need me for escalation. The analyst watched him carefully. We may need you for explanation. Marcus paused at the doorway. I've explained enough, he said. He walked out before anyone could stop him. The hangar felt louder when he returned. A drone lifted overhead and moved toward the exit lanes. Its motion looked smooth, but Marcus saw the tiny corrections now everywhere. He couldn't unsee them. Dylan jogged up beside him. So? Dylan asked. You break the system? Marcus kept walking. It was already broken. Dylan laughed lightly, thinking it was a joke. Marcus didn't. He reached his station and picked up his tools again. For the next hour, no one bothered him. But the atmosphere had shifted. Managers walked the floor more often. The audit team moved in tighter circles. Conversations dropped when Marcus passed. He felt like a fault line under the building. Late afternoon, Greg approached again. They're calling a leadership meeting tomorrow morning, Greg said quietly. Regional director dialing in. Marcus nodded once. Greg studied him. You could have kept quiet yesterday. Marcus didn't answer. Greg added, most people would have. Marcus looked at the drone bay. Most people didn't see it, he said. Greg watched him for a long moment. You planning to stick around? Greg asked. Marcus hesitated. He thought about packing his apartment. Quietly. No forwarding address. Just another city, another job where nobody asked questions. He thought about his sister's kitchen table, the way she pretended not to worry about him. He thought about the drones in the air. If I leave now, Marcus said slowly, it looks like I did something wrong. Greg nodded slightly. And did you? Greg asked. Marcus met his eyes. No. Greg gave a short nod. Then don't run, Greg said. Marcus didn't respond. Because running had never been about guilt. It had been about keeping the world simple. The shift ended without incident. Marcus clocked out and walked to his car as the sun dipped low behind the warehouse complex. The sky was pale orange, almost calm. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. His phone buzzed. A message from his sister. Sunday? Still good? I'll make that stew you like. Marcus stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Yeah, he typed. I'll be there. He set the phone down. For the first time since yesterday, his hands trembled slightly. Not from fear of corporate meetings, from the realization that staying might pull him back into something bigger than a job. He started the car. As he drove out of the parking lot, a drone crossed overhead, heading toward the highway delivery route. It looked small against the sky, controlled, obedient. Marcus watched it through the windshield until it disappeared. He had spent years avoiding systems that needed him. Now he had stepped into one without meaning to, and it was starting to close around him. He drove home in silence. Tomorrow, they would ask more questions. Tomorrow, they would decide whether human judgment mattered more than clean data, and whether Marcus Reed was a maintenance worker, or something else entirely. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and kept driving. Marcus didn't sleep much. He lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling of his apartment, listening to the faint sounds of the building settling. Pipes clicking, a neighbor's television murmuring through the wall. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off and stopped again. At some point, he realized he'd been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly and forced himself to loosen his shoulders. The room was plain, barely lived in. A couch with a worn cushion. A small table with 2 chairs, though he only ever used one. A framed photo of his sister on the counter, face half turned where the camera lay. She'd been caught laughing. That photo was the only thing that made the place feel like it belonged to a person. Everything else looked temporary, like he'd always been ready to leave. He checked the time twice before his alarm went off. When it finally did, he got up immediately, showered, dressed, and ate a piece of toast without tasting it. His hands were steady again. That bothered him. He hated how his body could switch into readiness without permission. At the hangar, security had changed. Not officially. No new barriers. No new signs. That there were 2 guards at the front gate instead of 1. And the one who scanned Marcus's badge held it half a second longer than normal. Marcus didn't react. He walked in and felt the air of the hangar hit him like it always did. Cold metal. Fuel residue. The faint smell of ozone from the charging stations. The drones were lined up in their bays, glossy and quiet, like they were pretending they hadn't tried to fall out of the sky. Greg was waiting near the office door. He didn't speak at first, just nodded toward the conference room. Marcus followed. Inside, the room was already occupied. The 2 analysts were there again. The software engineer, eyes tired, a woman Marcus hadn't seen before, sat at the head of the table. She wore a dark blazer, her hair pulled back tight, and she had the kind of posture that didn't ask for attention but took it anyway. On the screen behind her was a paused frame of drone telemetry. She stood when Marcus entered. "Marcus Reed," she said. Not a question. Marcus nodded once. "My name is Elaine Porter," she continued, "Regional Director of Operations." Her handshake was firm, quick, businesslike. No warmth. Marcus sat when she gestured to the chair. Elaine didn't sit. She paced slightly, just a step or 2, like standing still would waste time. "I'll be blunt," she said. "You identified a stability issue in our cargo fleet that our own systems didn't flag." Marcus didn't respond. Elaine continued. "We ran internal cross-checks overnight. There are minor sensor divergence patterns across multiple units. Your interpretation appears correct." She said it like she was reading off a report. Marcus felt no satisfaction, only a quiet heaviness. Elaine folded her hands. "We have 2 problems. One is technical, one is human." Marcus kept his face neutral. "The technical problem is manageable," Elaine said. "We can recalibrate, tighten tolerance windows, update firmware. That will cost money and slow delivery schedules, but it can be done." She turned slightly toward him. "The human problem is you." The words landed clean and sharp. Marcus didn't flinch. Elaine watched him for a moment, measuring. "You are employed as maintenance," she said, "yet you demonstrate advanced understanding of autonomous flight behavior. You also accessed manual override systems without authorization." Marcus nodded once. "Yes." Elaine's expression didn't change. "So I need to know, are you a liability?" Marcus stared at her. He wanted to answer quickly. "No. Of course not. I'm just trying to do my job." But he didn't trust quick answers. Quick answers were how people got trapped. "I stopped the drone from falling," Marcus said instead. Elaine's eyes narrowed slightly, not offended, just analytical. "And if you hadn't?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer. Elaine let the silence sit. Then she gestured to the screen. "We're grounding the affected fleet segment until recalibration is complete. That decision will not be popular." One of the analysts shifted uncomfortably. Elaine ignored him. "I'm taking heat from corporate," she said, "and I'm going to take more." Marcus sat still. Elaine leaned forward slightly. "If I'm going to make a decision that impacts millions in contracts, I need to know the person who triggered it isn't unstable." Marcus kept his gaze steady. "Unstable," he said. Elaine nodded once like she'd expected that answer. "Where did you learn this?" she asked. Marcus felt the question in his chest. He could hear his sister's message again in his head. Sunday still good? He thought of her kitchen, her laugh, the way she watched him sometimes when she thought he wasn't paying attention. He didn't want her name anywhere near this company's files. I worked in defense contracting, Marcus said. Elaine didn't blink. What kind? Marcus hesitated. The room was too quiet. Everyone was listening. He could feel Greg's presence near the wall, silent but alert. Marcus spoke carefully. Flight systems, testing, operational support. Elaine nodded slowly. Black programs. Marcus's throat tightened. He didn't answer. Elaine didn't push immediately. She just watched him, letting the silence do the work. Finally, she said, "You don't have to confirm. It's obvious." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Elaine sat down for the first time. She slid a thin folder across the table toward him. It wasn't thick. No paperwork stack. Just a few sheets. "Your employment file is minimal," she said. "Too minimal." Marcus didn't open the folder. Elaine continued. "You have no social media presence. Your references are vague. Your previous employment is listed as a private contractor that no longer exists." The analysts glanced at each other. Marcus stayed still. Elaine tapped the folder once with her finger. "You didn't come here to build a career," she said. "You came here to disappear." Marcus didn't deny it. Elaine leaned back. "I understand that impulse more than you might think." Marcus looked at her. For the first time, her expression softened slightly. Not kind, just human. Then it hardened again. "But I can't let you disappear while we have drones flying over populated areas," she said. "Not if you're the only one who can see what the system is missing." Marcus felt the pressure in his chest deepen. He didn't like the way she framed it. Only one. He didn't want to be essential. Being essential was dangerous. Elaine watched him closely. "We need you to assist in recalibration and operational review, temporarily." Marcus didn't respond. The software engineer spoke, cautious. "We can handle recalibration without." Elaine held up a hand. He stopped. Elaine kept her eyes on Marcus. "This is not a request." Marcus's mouth went dry. He stared at the folder. Then he looked up again. "What happens if I say no?" he asked. Elaine didn't hesitate. "We investigate your background," she said. "Fully. Not because I want to. Because I have to. You are now part of an incident that could have caused fatalities." Marcus felt something cold spread under his skin. There it was, the quiet threat. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just a clean lever. Elaine continued. "If you cooperate, we keep this internal. We treat you as an asset, not a question mark." Asset. Marcus hated that word. He hated how familiar it sounded. Elaine slid another sheet forward. Temporary assignment. Elevated clearance, pay adjustment. No public acknowledgement. No media. No awards. She paused. "And no one outside this room needs to know what you used to be." Marcus stared at the paper. It was neat. Thought through. Like they'd already decided. He felt a pulse of anger, but he kept it buried. He looked at Elaine. "And if something goes wrong?" Elaine's voice stayed calm. "Then we handle it." Marcus almost smiled at that. Almost. Because he knew what handle it meant. It meant burying the truth, containing damage, controlling narrative. He had lived inside that language for too long. He sat back and breathed slowly. Greg's voice came quietly from the wall. "Marcus, this is probably the best offer you're going to get." Marcus didn't look at him. Elaine's eyes stayed fixed on Marcus. "We don't want to punish you," she said. "We want to use what you know to prevent something worse." Marcus's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. He didn't want to be used, but he also couldn't ignore what he'd seen. He could walk away, leave town, start over again. But the drones would still fly, and the tolerance window would still be too wide, and someone would eventually die because nobody wanted to admit the system needed a human. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, He nodded once. I'll help, he said. Elaine's expression didn't change, but the room's tension eased. Just a little. Good, she said. She slid a badge across the table. Temporary clearance. Marcus picked it up and turned it in his fingers. It was heavier than his normal one. Elaine stood again. We start today. Marcus looked at the badge. It felt like a collar. They moved him into the test bay by mid-morning. The test bay was a separate hangar section with reinforced walls and a wide-open ceiling. It was where they ran controlled flights, emergency drills, and simulation drops. Marcus had never been allowed in there before. Now the doors opened for him without question. The flight ops supervisor, a man named Curtis, greeted him with a stiff nod. Curtis didn't look like someone who trusted outsiders. He had the lean build of someone who still trained like it mattered. He handed Marcus a headset. Your job is to observe and advise, Curtis said, not to take over. Marcus looked at the headset. Understood, he said. Curtis didn't relax. The software engineer, Tom, stood near a console with his laptop open, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Elaine watched from behind them, arms crossed. A drone lifted from the platform and hovered at 20 feet. Marcus watched it carefully. The micro-corrections were still there. Tiny, constant. Tom began adjusting calibration parameters. Numbers shifted on his screen. He ran updates. The drone steadied slightly. Then it dipped. Marcus felt his body tense automatically. Curtis saw it. What? Marcus stared at the drone. Stop. Tom frowned. We're mid-update. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but his tone cut through the room. Stop the update, Marcus said. Curtis looked at Tom. Stop it. Tom's fingers froze. He hit abort. The drone's wobbles softened. Marcus exhaled slowly. Elaine stepped forward. Why? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He watched the drone hover, then shift slightly left, then correct. His eyes narrowed. Your update timing is interfering with sensor sync, Marcus said. You're stacking corrections on top of divergence. Tom's face tightened. That's not. Marcus cut him off with a small shake of his head. Not aggressive. Certain. Tom went quiet. Curtis stared at Marcus now like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. Elaine watched him too, and Marcus felt it again. That old, sharp awareness. The room changing shape around him. People adjusting their posture, their tone, their expectations. The more he spoke, the more they would depend on him. And dependence was how things got dangerous. Marcus looked away from the drone and forced his hands to relax. He could do this. He could help them fix it. And then he could go back to being invisible. That was the plan. But plans had never mattered much when the system decided it needed you. He watched the drone hover in silence, and he felt, deep inside, the quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. They kept him in the test bay all afternoon. Word spread fast. By the second calibration cycle, people who had no reason to be there were finding reasons to walk past the observation windows. Flight ops staff, supervisors, a few faces from corporate compliance. Marcus tried not to look at them. He focused on the drone. Tom adjusted parameters more cautiously now. No sweeping changes, small shifts, controlled increments. The drone responded with smaller corrections. The dips didn't disappear, but they lost their rhythm. Curtis stood beside Marcus, arms crossed, headset pressed tight to one ear. Better? Curtis asked quietly. Marcus watched the drone hover against the ceiling grid. It looked steady, almost convincing. Safer, Marcus said. Curtis glanced at him. That's not the same. No, Marcus replied. Curtis studied him a moment longer, then nodded slightly, like he appreciated the honesty. They ran simulation loads next, added weight to the drone's frame, increased wind input in the virtual environment. The system adapted. The corrections came slower now, less aggressive. Elaine stepped forward again. If we deploy this patch fleet-wide, what's the risk? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He hated predictive questions. Reduced delivery speed, Tom said quickly. Increased manual alerts. Elaine looked at Marcus. He swallowed once. You'll get more warning signals, he said. Some of them won't matter. Elaine nodded. False positives? Yes. And if we ignore them, she asked. Marcus met her eyes. Then you're back where you started. Silence. Elaine didn't break eye contact. Marcus felt something tighten under his ribs. He wasn't speaking as maintenance anymore, or even as consultant. He was speaking like someone who'd made these calls before. Curtis shifted his weight slightly. Elaine finally looked away. We'll take the hit, she said. Roll out recalibration in phases. Tom exhaled quietly, like he'd been holding tension he didn't want to show. They grounded another segment of the fleet before the end of shift. Marcus watched drones descend one by one across the hangar, settling into bays like tired animals. It should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt like exposure, because every correction they made, every adjustment, every subtle improvement traced back to him. And people were starting to notice. Near the end of the day, Curtis pulled him aside. Walk with me, Curtis said. They moved toward the back exit of the test bay, away from the others. Curtis didn't waste time. You've flown before, he said. Marcus kept his face neutral. I've worked with systems. Curtis gave him a look that said he wasn't fooled. I flew in the Corps, Curtis said. Not drones, actual aircraft. I know what it looks like when someone's waiting for a stall before the instruments show it. Marcus didn't respond. Curtis leaned against the wall. You don't flinch. You don't hesitate. You don't argue. You just move. Marcus stared at the concrete floor. That's training, Curtis continued. Not theory. Marcus felt a faint pulse in his throat. Curtis's voice softened slightly. You lose someone. The question hit harder than the others. Marcus didn't look up. For a second, he was somewhere else. Different air. Different sky. A machine screaming in dissent. A voice over comms cutting out mid-sentence. He forced the memory down. That's not relevant, Marcus said quietly. Curtis nodded slowly, like he understood the refusal. Fair enough, Curtis said. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Curtis added, You planning to stay? Marcus didn't answer right away. I haven't decided, he said. Curtis studied him. You don't look like someone who likes being needed, Curtis said. Marcus almost smiled. No, he said. Curtis pushed off the wall. Well, you are. He walked away. Marcus stayed there a moment longer. He didn't want to be needed. He wanted to be ordinary. Ordinary meant predictable. Predictable meant safe. He left through the side exit instead of walking back across the hangar floor. Outside, the evening air was cooler. The sky stretched wide over the warehouse complex. A few drones still crossed overhead in designated corridors, their navigation lights blinking faintly. He watched one pass. The micro-corrections were smaller now, harder to see. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt tired. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Marcus Reed, he said. A pause. Then a voice he recognized, though it had been years. Marcus. His spine stiffened. He hadn't heard that voice since before he'd taken this job. Who is this? Marcus asked, though he knew. You know who it is. The voice was calm, controlled, familiar in the worst way. Marcus walked farther from the building, putting distance between himself and any ears. I don't have this number, Marcus said. You weren't supposed to, the voice replied. Silence stretched between them. Marcus kept his breathing steady. How did you find me? He asked. Another pause. You stepped into a system that still talks to ours, the voice said. Marcus's jaw tightened. Of course. Corporate audits, cross-contract data sharing, background algorithm scanning names against old clearance databases. He should have expected it. You're out, Marcus said quietly. I signed out. Paperwork doesn't erase history, the voice replied. Marcus looked at the sky. A drone passed overhead, blinking red. What do you want? Marcus asked. We heard about the incident, the voice said. Manual override. Stability assessment. Clean intervention. Marcus didn't respond. You were always good at seeing the flaw before it became a problem, the voice continued. Marcus felt the old anger rise again. I'm not interested, he said. We're not offering what you think, the voice replied. Marcus stayed silent. A civilian fleet with structural tolerance miscalibration? That's a preview, Marcus. Automation is spreading. Logistics, security, defense infrastructure. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. I'm done, he said. You don't get to be done, the voice said softly. That one landed. Marcus opened his eyes and stared at the horizon. You left because you were tired of being necessary, the voice continued. But systems like that don't disappear. They multiply. Marcus's grip tightened around the phone. We have a position, the voice said. Consultative, remote. No deployments, just analysis. High compensation. Marcus almost laughed. High compensation, he repeated. Yes. Marcus thought of his apartment. The worn couch. The single chair at the table. He thought of his sister's kitchen. I'm not for sale, Marcus said. The voice didn't react. This isn't about money. Marcus's tone hardened slightly. Then it's about control. Silence. You walked back into it on your own, the voice said finally. We're simply acknowledging that. Marcus didn't answer. You can call this number if you reconsider, the voice said. But we won't call again. The line went dead. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. For a moment, he just stood there in the fading light. The past didn't shout. It whispered. It waited. He had stepped into a civilian problem and somehow sent a signal back into a world he'd tried to erase. He slid the phone into his pocket. He felt heavier now. Not because of the company, because of the reminder. No matter how small a life he built, the skills didn't shrink. They stayed. And other systems remembered. He walked to his car without looking back at the hangar. Inside, he sat in silence again before starting the engine. He imagined what would happen if he accepted that offer. Remote analysis. Secure lines, quiet rooms filled with data. No public recognition, no headlines. Just the old rhythm. Find the flaw. Correct it. Move on. He knew how that ended. It always ended with something bigger. He started the engine. As he drove away, another drone crossed overhead, steadier now, safer, because he had stepped in, and stepping in had cost him more than he'd expected. He didn't know yet which system would demand him next. The company. Or the past. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and kept driving into the dark. The grounded drones sat in their bays like they were being punished. Marcus noticed it the moment he walked in the next morning. The hangar felt heavier, quieter. Too many empty flight lanes, too much stillness. People didn't like stillness in a place built for motion. Curtis was already in the test bay, headset on, talking to Tom. Elaine stood nearby with a tablet in her hands, face unreadable. Marcus walked up without speaking. Elaine glanced at him. We're rolling the patch out to the remaining fleet segment today. Marcus nodded. Curtis looked tired. We've got limited time. Corporate wants partial operations restored by noon. Tom muttered something under his breath. Marcus didn't ask what. Elaine's eyes stayed on Marcus. We need to clear 3 corridors. Medical shipments. High priority. Marcus felt a faint tightening in his chest. High priority always meant we're willing to risk more. He said carefully, Have you verified drift patterns on those units? Tom answered before Elaine could. We ran diagnostics. They're clean. Marcus stared at him. Clean by your definition. Tom's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. Elaine stepped in. Marcus, we are not ignoring risk. We are balancing it. Marcus nodded once. He didn't like that word either, balancing. It sounded responsible. Mature. Like a person weighing 2 equal options. But they weren't equal. One side was money. The other side was gravity. Curtis signaled toward the platform. We're starting with Corridor C. A drone lifted smoothly from its bay and moved into hover position. It held steady. Marcus watched it. He waited for the micro dips. They were there but smaller, almost buried. Tom began the update sequence. The drone stayed steady. Curtis nodded. Looks good. Elaine's shoulders eased slightly. Marcus didn't relax. The update finished. The drone hovered another 30 seconds, then began its descent. Perfect. Curtis glanced at Marcus. Any objections? Marcus hesitated. He could feel the pressure in the room, the need for him to approve, the desire for him to be the stamp of safety. He didn't want that, but he also didn't want to be silent if he saw something. It's stable, Marcus said. Elaine nodded once. Good. They moved to the next unit. Same procedure, same hover, same update. Marcus kept watching. On the third drone, something changed. Not in the drone itself, in the air. A faint vibration, almost like the hangar had taken a breath. Marcus felt it in his teeth first. He turned his head slightly toward the hangar doors. Outside, the sky was overcast. Wind was picking up. Curtis was watching the drone. Tom was watching his laptop. Elaine was watching her tablet. Nobody was watching the doors. Marcus's gaze stayed fixed there. A low rumble rolled through the air. Not thunder, not weather. It sounded mechanical. Then a radio crackled from the hangar floor outside the test bay. A voice came through, strained. Flight ops, we've got an issue in corridor A. Curtis snapped his head toward the sound. Repeat. The radio crackled again. Unit A-17 is drifting, not responding to correction. Marcus's stomach dropped. Curtis was already moving, stepping out of the test bay. Lockdown corridor A. Clear ground lanes. Elaine followed him immediately. Marcus moved too, but not because anyone told him. Because he could already picture it. A drone drifting while the system insisted it was fine. Outside the test bay, the hangar floor was suddenly alive with motion. People stepping back. Forklifts stopping mid-path. Heads turning upward. Marcus saw the drone immediately. It was high, near the open hangar doors, hovering just outside. But it wasn't hovering, it was sliding sideways, slow and steady, like something invisible was pulling it. Its navigation lights blinked calmly, almost mocking. Curtis raised his voice. Manual override! A flight ops operator ran to a console station and began typing. The drone didn't respond. It drifted farther, toward the outer yard, toward the fuel storage. Marcus's body went cold. The same path, the same angle. He moved without thinking, pushing through the small crowd forming beneath the doors. Curtis saw him. Marcus, stay back. Marcus didn't listen. He reached the manual control rig. This time it wasn't dusty. It was already powered on. Someone had tried. The joystick trembled slightly in its neutral position. Marcus grabbed the headset hanging from the rig and shoved it on. The channel was chaos. Curtis's voice, Elaine's, operators shouting codes and IDs. Marcus's fingers flew across the console. The screen flashed a warning. No response. Control link failures. His throat tightened. That wasn't a sensor drift problem. That was command loss. He scanned the system quickly. Signal strength. Weak. He looked out the hangar doors. The drone was farther now, drifting above the yard. The wind was stronger outside. But wind didn't explain the complete refusal to correct. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, scanning the drone's behavior. It wasn't tumbling. It wasn't unstable. It was obedient, just not to them. He heard Curtis's voice in his headset. We're losing it. We need it down now. Marcus didn't answer. He switched channels, bypassing the main ops net and accessing the diagnostic frequency. The screen asked for a clearance code. His new badge gave him access. The system opened. Marcus's jaw clenched. He pulled up the drone's back end and saw the problem immediately. The drone wasn't failing. It was being rerouted. A new command sequence was running under its autonomy layer. Clean, deliberate. Someone had injected instructions. Elaine's voice cut in sharply. Marcus, talk to me. Marcus swallowed. Someone's inside the system, he said. Silence hit the channel for half a second. Then voices erupted. What? Tom shouted. Curtis's voice hardened. Are you sure? Marcus watched the command line scroll. Yes, he said. The drone drifted farther, almost over the fuel storage perimeter now. Marcus felt sweat break out along his back. The system wasn't fighting itself anymore. It was being steered. Curtis's voice came through again, urgent. "Can you override it?" Marcus's hands tightened around the joystick. He tried. The controls lagged. The drone twitched, barely, like it was hearing him but ignoring him. He pushed harder. The drone twitched again, then continued drifting. Marcus's heart began to pound, not panic. Recognition. This wasn't a glitch. This was a takeover. And he had seen this before, not here, not with cargo drones, but with something that had a warhead under its belly. He forced himself to breathe. He adjusted frequency hopping, tried to strengthen the control link. The screen flashed. INSRIP to channel. HRIP. Channel AXPIT. Chill. "Elaine," he said, voice tight, "who has access to encrypted flight channels?" Elaine didn't answer immediately. Then her voice came through, lower. "Corporate Security, Defense Division." Marcus swallowed. So the company wasn't just logistics. Not fully. Of course. Curtis cut in. "If that drone hits fuel storage," Marcus interrupted, sharper than he meant to. "I know." He stared at the screen. The injected command sequence had a destination coordinate. Not random. It was steering the drone directly into the restricted yard. Into the worst possible place. Marcus's hands moved again. He didn't hesitate. He initiated emergency failsafe. The system denied it. Failsafe. Lok's Nabeman override required. Marcus felt his breath catch. Failsafe locked. That meant someone with higher clearance had disabled the emergency shutdown. His mouth went dry. That wasn't an accident. He heard Elaine's voice, clipped. "We're evacuating the yard. Can you bring it down?" Marcus stared at the drone drifting closer. The distance was closing. Seconds, maybe a minute. He looked around the hangar quickly. A maintenance lift sat idle near the door, a steel cable spool beside it. Heavy-duty tether lines. His mind moved faster now. Not calculating heroics, just problem-solving. He grabbed the cable spool and rolled it toward the lift. A technician shouted, "What are you doing?" Marcus didn't answer. He climbed onto the lift platform and hit the control lever. The lift rose with a hydraulic groan. The wind hit his face as he rose toward the open doorframe. Cold. Sharp. The drone was outside now, hovering above the yard like it was waiting. Marcus could see it clearly. Its cargo clamps were empty, but it still carried a lithium battery pack. Enough to burn. Enough to explode if it hit the wrong thing. Curtis shouted through the headset, "Marcus, get down!" Marcus ignored him. He unhooked the tether line and secured it to the lift railing. His hands moved fast, fingers sure even as the wind shook the platform. He watched the drone. It drifted closer. He timed his breathing. The lift reached the top of its range. Marcus leaned out slightly, cable in hand. The drone was close enough now that he could hear its rotors fighting the wind. He waited. Not for courage, for alignment. When the drone drifted within reach, Marcus threw the cable. The line snapped out in an arc and caught on the drone's undercarriage. For half a second, it slid. Then, it snagged. The drone jerked. The lift shook violently. Marcus's stomach lurched. He grabbed the railing with one hand and held the cable with the other, bracing his boots against the platform. The drone pulled. The lift groaned. The cable tightened like a live thing. Marcus's arms burned immediately. Curtis's voice screamed in his ear, "Marcus, let go!" Marcus clenched his teeth. If he let go, it would drift straight into fuel storage. He couldn't. The drone yanked again, harder. Marcus felt something tear in his shoulder. Pain flashed hot. He didn't scream. He just pulled back. He leaned his weight into the cable, dragging the drone's nose slightly off course. It fought him. Or whoever was controlling it fought him. The drone tilted. Its rotors screamed louder. Marcus's hands began to slip, sweat and wind and strain. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He dragged the drone inch by inch toward the hangar doorframe. If he could get it inside, they could kill the signal. Block it. Physically shut it down. The drone jerked again. Marcus's shoulder flared with pain. His vision narrowed. He could hear someone below yelling. He couldn't make out words. He pulled again. The drone tilted sharply, losing its smooth drift. For the first time, it looked uncertain, not broken, but disrupted. Marcus felt the line dig into his palm. The rope burned. Then the drone's rotors clipped the hangar door frame. Metal sparked. The drone jolted violently. Marcus's stomach dropped. The cable snapped tighter. For a second he thought it would break. Instead, the drone spun, slammed into the side of the door frame, and dropped. It fell hard into the hangar yard just inside the threshold. Concrete cracked. The drone's casing shattered. For a moment, everything froze. Then smoke began to rise. Marcus didn't breathe. He stared down at it, still holding the cable, his hands trembling. No explosion. Not yet. Curtis's voice came through, strained. Fire suppression. Now! Marcus released the cable and nearly collapsed against the lift railing. His shoulder throbbed like it had a heartbeat. He watched technicians rush toward the smoking wreck with extinguishers. Elaine stood near the door, face pale, staring up at Marcus. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was about to say something. Marcus didn't wait. He lowered the lift, slow and shaking. His hands felt numb. When his boots hit the ground, Curtis grabbed him by the arm, pulling him back from the smoking drone. Curtis's face was tight with anger and relief. "What the hell were you thinking?" Curtis demanded. Marcus's voice came out hoarse. "Thinking it wasn't going to stop." Curtis stared at him. Then his gaze flicked to Marcus's shoulder. "Are you hurt?" Curtis asked. Marcus shook his head automatically, but his arm hung wrong. Elaine stepped forward. Her eyes were fixed on the wreckage, not on Marcus. "That wasn't a malfunction," she said quietly. Marcus swallowed. "No," he replied. Elaine finally looked at him, and Marcus saw something in her face that hadn't been there before. Not just concern, fear, because now it wasn't about tolerance windows or calibration. Someone had tried to weaponize their fleet. And Marcus had just proven he wasn't only useful, he was necessary. They shut the hangar down within minutes. Security doors sealed, external gates locked. Employees gathered in small clusters, whispering in low, tight voices. The wrecked drone lay on its side near the threshold, its shell cracked open, battery compartment scorched but intact. If it had hit fuel storage, there wouldn't be a threshold left. Marcus sat on an overturned crate while a medic wrapped his shoulder in a compression band. He insisted it was nothing. The medic didn't argue, but her hands were firm. "Sprain," she said. "Maybe a partial tear. You need imaging." Marcus nodded without committing. Across the hangar, Elaine was on the phone, pacing slowly. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Curtis stood near the wreckage, arms crossed, jaw set. Tom hovered near a console, pale, replaying the last 60 seconds of telemetry over and over. Marcus watched the drone's final drift on a nearby screen. The injected command string was still there in the log. Encrypted. External. He stood up slowly, ignoring the medic's protest. He walked toward Tom. "Freeze that frame," Marcus said. Tom hit pause. Marcus leaned in. The command sequence had originated from inside their network perimeter, not from outside, not from some random hacker, from a secured channel. Elaine ended her call and joined them. "IT is isolating the breach," she said. "They're treating it as hostile intrusion." Marcus didn't look at her. "It was an intrusion," he said. Tom blinked. "What?" Marcus pointed at the log. It used internal authentication keys. Elaine's posture stiffened. "That's not possible," Tom said quickly. "Those keys are segmented." Marcus met his eyes. "Segmented doesn't mean unreachable." Elaine stepped closer. "Are you suggesting someone inside the company did this?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. He felt the weight of the implication. "Yes," he said. The word settled heavy in the air. Curtis walked over. "Inside as in corporate, or inside as in here?" Marcus looked at the hangar floor. The workers gathered in small groups. The security guards by the doors. The techs, who looked shaken. "Not here," Marcus said quietly. Elaine's jaw tightened. Tom shook his head. Why would corporate sabotage its own fleet? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He had seen this logic before. You don't sabotage to destroy. You sabotage to test, to probe weaknesses, to measure response time, to see who reacts and how. He felt a cold certainty in his chest. It wasn't meant to explode, Marcus said. Curtis frowned. It was headed for fuel storage. Yes, Marcus said, but not at full speed, not a dive. Tom stared at him. You think this was controlled? Marcus nodded slowly. A stress test, he said. Elaine's face hardened. We do not conduct stress tests in active corridors, she said. Marcus looked at her. Maybe you don't, he replied. Silence. The implication was clear. Another division, another department. The defense arm. Elaine exhaled sharply. You're speculating. Marcus didn't argue, but he knew the pattern. Inject controlled anomaly. Observe response. Evaluate human intervention. He felt something twist in his chest. They hadn't just tested the fleet. They'd tested him. Curtis looked between them. We need proof before we accuse anyone. Elaine nodded once. Agreed. She turned to Marcus. Can you trace the command origin? Marcus hesitated. That wasn't maintenance work. That wasn't even civilian systems analysis. That was counter-intrusion tracing. He knew how to do it. He didn't want to. Yes, he said. They moved into the secured IT room. It was smaller than the test bay, lined with server racks and blinking lights. A faint hum filled the air. Marcus sat at a terminal, while Tom and two IT specialists stood behind him. His shoulder throbbed with every small movement, but he ignored it. He pulled up the command string again and began peeling back layers of encryption. Tom watched over his shoulder. You've done this before, Tom said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. The trace wasn't clean. It bounced through internal relays masked by standard security layers. But whoever had done it hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected someone to look this closely. Marcus followed the trail deeper. The final node appeared on screen. He froze. It was tagged to a secure corporate development server. Defense Integration Lab. Tom's breath caught behind him. Elaine stepped closer. What is it? She asked. Marcus didn't look at her. Your defense division, he said. Elaine stared at the screen. That lab doesn't have access to active logistics corridors, she said. Marcus didn't answer. He clicked into the server logs. The access request had been authorized, signed off digitally by someone high enough to bypass normal restrictions. Elaine's voice went quieter. Who authorized it? Marcus scrolled. A name appeared. Vice President of Autonomous Systems Integration. Elaine closed her eyes briefly. Curtis swore under his breath. Tom looked like he might be sick. Marcus leaned back in his chair. His shoulder flared with pain. They were testing response latency, Marcus said quietly. Elaine opened her eyes. Without informing operations. Yes. Curtis's jaw clenched. That drone could have killed someone. Marcus nodded. That's why it was slow, he said. Tom looked at him sharply. Slow? They wanted to see if the system would self-correct, Marcus said, and if it didn't, who would? Elaine's gaze shifted to him. And you did, she said. Marcus didn't respond. He felt tired now. Not physically. Deep. He had stepped in to prevent a glitch and uncovered something deliberate. Elaine straightened slowly. This stays contained, she said. Curtis looked at her. Contained. Elaine's voice hardened. We do not create panic on the floor. We gather evidence. Then we escalate internally. Marcus stood. His shoulder protested. And then what? He asked. Elaine met his eyes. Then we decide whether this company values human oversight, she said. Marcus watched her carefully. Or blind automation, she added. He held her gaze. For the first time he saw something in her expression that wasn't corporate composure. It was personal. She hadn't known, and she didn't like being used either. Marcus nodded once. He turned toward the door. Elaine called after him. Marcus. He stopped, but didn't turn. You saved lives today, she said. Marcus stared at the server rack in front of him. I stopped a machine, he replied. He walked out. The hangar was quieter now. Most employees had been sent home early. The wrecked drone was being wheeled away, covered with a tarp. Marcus walked past it without looking. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. Same one from yesterday. He didn't answer. It buzzed again, then stopped. He stepped outside into the fading light. The sky was clear now. A few drones hovered in restricted holding patterns, grounded mid-route. He leaned against the wall of the building, breathing slowly. They had tested him, maybe not by name, but by design. He thought about the offer from the voice on the phone. Consultative, remote, high compensation. He thought about the defense lab server, about systems that quietly evaluated human response to danger. He felt anger rise, slow and steady, not loud, just certain. They had built automation to remove human error, and then they had relied on a human to fix it. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. He had two choices: step back into that world and try to influence it from inside, or stay here and fight it where it had nearly cost real lives. He thought about his sister again, her kitchen table, her steady voice. He pushed off the wall and walked to his car. The unknown number didn't call again, but he knew it would. Systems like that didn't give up. As he drove away, he made a decision, not about the company, about himself. He wouldn't go back to being someone's quiet solution. Not for money, not for control. If he stayed involved, it would be on his terms. And if that meant tearing apart a culture that trusted machines more than people, he was prepared. Because this time, the stakes weren't distant. They were above warehouses, above roads, above families who never signed up to be part of a stress test. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The next move wouldn't be quiet, but it would be his. The next morning, Elaine didn't call him into the conference room. She called him into her office. It wasn't on the hangar floor. It was on the second level, behind a secure door Marcus had never had access to before. The hallway was carpeted, quiet, lined with framed photos of company milestones. Drones in formation, executives shaking hands, smiling teams in front of prototype aircraft. The kind of pictures meant to prove nothing bad ever happened here. Elaine's assistant let him in without speaking. Elaine was standing by the window, looking down at the hangar. Her blazer was gone. She wore a plain button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She didn't turn immediately. Marcus stepped inside and shut the door behind him. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. Cleaner than the hangar. Too clean. Elaine finally turned. She looked tired, not the exhausted kind that comes from long hours. The kind that comes from realizing you've been living inside someone else's illusion. She gestured to a chair. Marcus sat. Elaine stayed standing. I spoke to corporate leadership last night, she said. Marcus didn't respond. Elaine continued. They denied involvement. They claimed the defense lab server access was forged. Marcus watched her face. She didn't believe them. And? Marcus asked. Elaine's mouth tightened. And they ordered me to treat the event as a hostile intrusion. Marcus nodded slowly. That was predictable. If they framed it as an outside threat, nobody inside had to be accountable. No executive careers at risk. No internal rot to admit. Elaine walked behind her desk and picked up a folder. She slid it across to Marcus. This is what they offered you, she said. Marcus stared at it. He didn't open it. Defense Division contract, Elaine said. Consultative role. Restricted disclosure. High compensation. Relocation assistance. Marcus looked up. Elaine watched him closely. They're not subtle. Marcus's jaw tightened. So they already knew about me, he said. Elaine nodded. They ran your name. They found what you didn't want found. Marcus felt something settle heavy in his chest. He'd known it would happen eventually. But knowing didn't make it easier. Elaine leaned forward slightly. I need to know what they have on you. Marcus hesitated. His instincts screamed to keep quiet, but his instincts had also led him into the lift yesterday, and he couldn't pretend this was just about him anymore. He looked down at his hands, grease under his nails, the bandage on his shoulder. Then he spoke. I was a pilot, he said. Elaine's eyes stayed steady. What kind? Marcus swallowed once. Black Ops, he said. The word tasted wrong in his mouth. Too blunt, too clean for what it really meant. Elaine didn't react, but something in her expression shifted, like a final piece slid into place. You were running unmanned systems? She asked. Marcus nodded. Not always unmanned. Elaine sat down slowly. Marcus could see her processing it. Not with fear, with calculation. Not because she didn't care, because her job required her to decide what reality she was standing in. Elaine spoke quietly. Did you do anything illegal? Marcus stared at her. The question wasn't judgmental. It was practical. Marcus thought about answering. He thought about the file in her folder, the contract, the relocation offer. He thought about what people like that considered illegal. Then he said, I followed orders. Elaine held his gaze. That's not an answer, she said. Marcus exhaled slowly. No, he admitted. Elaine leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Why did you leave? Marcus didn't respond at first. He thought of a desert sky, a screen full of coordinates, a voice over comms asking for confirmation, a target that wasn't a target, a child's shape running across a thermal image. He felt his stomach twist. His throat tightened. He swallowed hard. I made a mistake, Marcus said. Elaine watched him. Marcus kept going, voice quiet. Not technical, not tactical. Human. Elaine didn't push further. She didn't need the details to understand what kind of weight he carried. She nodded once. And you disappeared, she said. Marcus nodded. Elaine tapped the folder again. And now they want you back. Marcus didn't answer. Elaine's voice hardened. I won't let them use this facility as their playground. Marcus looked at her. She meant it. Elaine continued. But if we go public with this, they'll bury you. They'll leak your past. They'll ruin you. Marcus's jaw clenched. He'd expected that too. Elaine studied him. Do you have family? Marcus hesitated. He almost lied, but lying didn't protect her. It only gave Elaine less to work with. My sister, Marcus said. Elaine nodded. Children? No. Elaine's eyes sharpened. She lives nearby? Marcus didn't answer. Elaine didn't need him to. Her expression tightened. They'll go after leverage, she said quietly. Marcus felt cold spread across his skin. He stood slowly. Elaine looked up. Marcus, sit down. Marcus didn't. He stared at the window. Down below, drones sat grounded. Workers moved slowly across the floor. Leverage. He thought of his sister's laugh. He thought of her stew. He thought of how safe she thought he was now. He looked at Elaine. What do you want me to do? He asked. Elaine held his gaze. I want you to help me fix this without becoming their hostage. Marcus let out a breath. That sounded like a fantasy, but Elaine's eyes were steady. I can't fight them alone, she said. Not with their resources, not with their access. Marcus felt his shoulder ache again. He could walk away. He could sign the contract and disappear into their system, become a consultant, keep his sister safe by staying under their thumb. That was the easy path. The clean path. But it wasn't freedom. It was surrender, with paperwork. Marcus shook his head once. I'm not signing that, he said. Elaine didn't look surprised. She nodded. Then we moved quickly. She stood and walked to a whiteboard on the wall. It was blank except for a few operational notes. She uncapped a marker and wrote 2 words. Human oversight. Then underneath it, document everything. Elaine turned back to him. We create a record, she said. A chain of accountability. We lock it into compliance archives. We send it to legal. We make it impossible to erase. Marcus stared at the words. He understood. Not a dramatic confrontation, not revenge. A paper trail, the kind that didn't care about threats, the kind that made people nervous. Elaine continued, if they want to test live corridors again, they'll have to sign their names to it. Marcus nodded slowly. And if they refuse? He asked. Elaine's mouth tightened. Then they can't do it. Marcus looked at her. You really think policy stops people like that? He asked. Elaine held his gaze. Not policy. Exposure. Marcus exhaled. He knew that language too. Exposure was the only thing systems feared. Elaine stepped closer. Marcus, you can help me change how this place runs. You can force them to admit what automation can't do without human judgment. Marcus felt the weight of the offer. It wasn't the contract in the folder. It was something else. A chance to do it without disappearing, without being owned. He didn't answer immediately. He thought of the way Curtis looked at him, the way Tom's face had changed when he realized the system could be hijacked, the way the floor staff had stared up at him on the lift, not seeing a hero, just seeing someone who acted when everyone else froze. Marcus swallowed. Fine, he said. Elaine nodded once. Good. She walked back to her desk and slid another file toward him. New role, she said. Safety and systems oversight. Direct reporting to me. Marcus stared at it. That's public, he said. Elaine nodded. Yes. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Public meant visible. Visible meant vulnerable. Elaine leaned forward. You can't stay hidden and still control the outcome. Marcus looked away. She was right. He hated that she was right. He hated that she was right. Elaine's voice softened slightly. You don't have to be the company's hero. You just have to be the person who says no when the machine says yes. Marcus stared at the folder. Then he nodded once. By afternoon, his badge was changed. His shirt wasn't. He still wore the same gray maintenance uniform, but the clearance level on his badge was higher. People noticed. When Marcus walked onto the hangar floor, conversation stopped. Not all at once, but enough. Curtis approached him near the drone bays. He looked Marcus up and down. They promoted you, Curtis said. Marcus nodded. Curtis's mouth twitched. You look like you hate it. Marcus didn't deny it. Curtis glanced around. People are talking. Marcus nodded again. Curtis leaned closer, voice low. Defense Division is sniffing around. They asked for you this morning. Marcus's chest tightened. And? He asked. Curtis shrugged. Elaine told them no. Marcus felt a faint pulse of gratitude, sharp and uncomfortable. Curtis studied him. You're picking a fight, Curtis said. Marcus met his eyes. Yes, Marcus said. Curtis nodded slowly. Then, to Marcus's surprise, Curtis said, Good. Marcus didn't know what to say. Curtis looked past him at the drone bays. They've been acting like humans are a liability for years, Curtis said. Maybe it's time someone reminded them what happens when nobody's watching. Marcus stared at the drones. He could hear their rotors in his mind. The steady hum of machines doing what they were told, and the silence when they weren't. He thought of the lift again, the cable burning his hands, the moment the drone clipped the door frame and fell. It wasn't bravery. It was refusal. Refusal to let the system decide what was acceptable. Marcus exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure how long Elaine could hold the line. He wasn't sure how long he could either. But he knew one thing. If he ran now, they would keep doing it. And next time, there might not be a lift close enough, or a cable strong enough. Marcus turned away from the drone bays and walked toward the operations office. He had paperwork to write, reports to file, logs to lock down. Not glamorous, not heroic, but real. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to control. Not over machines. Over himself. Marcus stayed late. The hangar lights dimmed in stages, sections of the building going quiet as shifts ended and workers clocked out. The drone bays sat half full, half empty, some grounded for recalibration, some cleared for restricted corridors. He sat in the operations office with a stack of printed logs spread across the desk. Real paper. Elaine had insisted. Harder to delete. Harder to quietly rewrite. His shoulder still ached, but the pain had dulled into something manageable. It was the kind of pain that didn't ask for sympathy. It just reminded him where he'd been. He read through the telemetry again. The injected command string. The encrypted channel lock. The fail-safe denial. He highlighted each section, then wrote notes in the margins with a pen that bled slightly through the paper. The act felt strange, almost old-fashioned. But it grounded him. Curtis came in around 9. He didn't knock. Just stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "You're still here," Curtis said. Marcus didn't look up. "Yeah." Curtis leaned against the wall, watching. "You think they'll let this go?" Curtis asked. Marcus shook his head once. "No." Curtis nodded slowly. Defense Division already filed an inquiry request. They want access to the wreckage. Marcus finally looked up. Curtis's face was tight. "They're calling it classified equipment," Curtis added, even though it was a cargo unit. Marcus felt the anger rise, slow and steady. "They don't want the wreckage," Marcus said. "They want the evidence." Curtis nodded. Marcus tapped the stack of papers. "It's already copied," Marcus said. Curtis stared at the papers like they were weapons. In a way they were. Curtis hesitated, then said, "Elaine asked me to tell you something." Marcus waited. Curtis's voice dropped. "She moved your sister's address out of your HR file." Marcus's stomach tightened. He didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until he let it out. Curtis continued. "She said if anyone asks, it was an administrative correction, nothing else." Marcus sat still. He didn't like knowing Elaine had looked that far into his life. But he understood why. Curtis watched him carefully. "You okay?" Marcus nodded once. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something heavier. Because it meant the fight was real enough now that Elaine was protecting people Marcus hadn't even told her about. Curtis left after that. Marcus kept writing. He didn't stop until the notes were complete, the logs copied, the timestamps verified. He sent scanned versions to compliance, to legal, to Elaine's secured archive. He printed extra copies and locked them in a cabinet. Then he sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. His mind drifted, against his will. Not to the hangar. To the desert, to a screen glowing green in the dark. To the feeling of pressing a control and watching a distant point vanish. He swallowed. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand and forced himself back into the room. This was different. Here, the people were real. The consequences were close. The machines were not abstract. He was not just following orders. Near midnight, Elaine walked in. She looked exhausted. Hair slightly loose now. No makeup. Just a person carrying too much. She didn't speak at first. She walked to the desk and looked at the stack of papers. Then she nodded. "Good," she said quietly. Marcus stood. Elaine's eyes moved over him, taking in the bandage on his shoulder, the fatigue in his face. "You should go home," she said. Marcus didn't move. Elaine exhaled. "They're going to come for this. For you." Marcus nodded. "I know," he said. Elaine leaned against the desk. Her voice was quieter now. "Legal confirms something. That defense lab VP. He's not acting alone." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Elaine continued. "There's a program. Internal. A partnership. They've been using our logistics fleet as a live environment to test autonomous control protocols." Marcus stared at her. "That's why they widened tolerances," he said. Elaine nodded. "And why they locked fail-safes," Marcus added. Elaine nodded again. Marcus felt his stomach twist. It wasn't just reckless, it was planned. Elaine's voice hardened. "I sent the documentation to the board, not corporate leadership. The board." Marcus stared at her. Elaine held his gaze. "They can bury an internal report. They can't bury a board inquiry without leaving fingerprints." Marcus exhaled slowly. That was bold. It was also dangerous. Elaine seemed to read his expression. Yes, she said. They'll be furious. Marcus nodded. Elaine straightened. Tomorrow you'll be asked to sign the defense contract again. They'll make it look like a favor. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Elaine stepped closer. Don't sign it, she said. Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought of his sister again. He thought of what it would mean if they pressured her, if they followed her, if she became collateral. He didn't want that. But signing wouldn't protect her. It would only make him obedient. He shook his head once. I won't, Marcus said. Elaine nodded. Then she surprised him. She held out her hand. Not a business handshake. Something quieter. Marcus hesitated, then took it. Her grip was firm, but there was a tremor in it. Elaine released his hand quickly, as if she regretted showing anything human. You did the right thing, she said. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't like hearing that. Not because he disagreed, because it sounded like the kind of sentence people said before they sent you into something you couldn't come back from. Elaine turned and walked toward the door. Before she left, she paused. You said you made a mistake once, she said without looking back. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Elaine's voice softened, barely. You're not making it again. Then she left. The office was quiet again. Marcus stood there for a long time after she was gone. He didn't feel redeemed. He didn't feel clean. He felt anchored, like he had finally stopped running long enough to put his weight somewhere. He drove home in the dark. The streets were empty. Streetlights reflected off his windshield. His phone stayed silent the whole drive. When he reached his apartment, he sat in the car for a moment before going inside. He listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No strange cars idling nearby. No quiet pressure in the air. Just night. Inside, he washed his hands at the sink. The water ran over grease stains that weren't there anymore. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked older than he remembered. The kind of older that didn't come from age, but from decisions. He turned off the light and went to bed. He slept for a few hours. Not deeply, but enough. Sunday came fast. He drove to his sister's house with a bag of bread and a bottle of wine, like she told him not to. He parked outside and sat there for a moment, watching her porch light glow. He could smell stew even from the driveway. He got out and walked up the steps. His sister opened the door before he knocked, smiling like she'd been waiting. About time, she said. Marcus tried to smile back. He stepped inside. The warmth hit him immediately. The smell of food, the sound of a TV in the other room, a life that didn't know about tolerance windows or encrypted channels. She hugged him. Marcus froze for half a second, then hugged her back. Her arms were small, but firm. You look tired, she said, pulling back. Marcus nodded. Work's been busy. She gave him a look. Busy how? Marcus didn't answer. He stepped into the kitchen and set the bread down on the counter. She watched him quietly. They ate together. She talked about small things, neighbors, grocery prices, a friend's new baby. She kept her voice light, but Marcus could tell she was studying him between sentences, noticing the way he favored his shoulder, the way his eyes tracked every sound outside the window. At one point, she reached across the table and touched his hand. You're here, she said softly. Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't, because her voice carried something he didn't deserve. Relief. He swallowed hard and nodded once. After dinner, she packed leftovers into containers without asking if he wanted them. She always did that. When she handed them to him at the door, she hesitated. Marcus, she said. He looked at her. She didn't smile this time. You're not disappearing again, are you? She asked. The question was quiet, controlled, like she'd practiced it. Marcus felt something twist inside him. He shook his head once. No, he said. His sister held his gaze. You promise? She asked. Marcus hesitated. He didn't like promises. Promises were fragile. They broke under pressure. But he thought about the hangar, the drones, the paper trail. Elaine's hand shaking slightly when she'd held his. He thought about how he'd always believed the only way to keep her safe was to stay invisible. and how invisibility had almost let people die. He nodded. "I promise," Marcus said. His sister exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for years. She hugged him again. This time, Marcus didn't freeze. He held her tighter than he meant to. When he drove away, the containers of stew sat in the passenger seat, warm and heavy. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had finally stopped choosing silence just because it was easier. Monday morning, the board inquiry began. It didn't happen with sirens or headlines. It happened with emails, formal language, meeting requests, legal notifications. But the hangar felt different. The analysts avoided eye contact. The Defense Division representatives arrived in suits and were met at the door by Elaine and legal counsel. They didn't get access to the wreckage. They didn't get Marcus. The drones flew again later that week, slower and with more human oversight. Curtis hired more manual controllers. Tom rewrote parts of the diagnostic system to flag patterns that used to be smoothed away. And Marcus stayed. Not in the shadows. Not on a pedestal. Just there, walking the floor. Asking questions, saying no when a machine said yes. Months later, the company culture shifted in small ways. Meetings began with human risk assessments, not just performance charts. Every autonomous update required a manual sign-off from operations. The phrase acceptable margins stopped being a shield and started being a question. Marcus never told anyone everything about his past. He didn't need to. The weight was still there. Some nights he still woke up staring at the ceiling, remembering things he couldn't undo. But he stopped believing the only way to live with it was to disappear. He didn't find redemption. Not cleanly. He found something quieter. A place where his judgment mattered, where it protected people who would never know his name, and where, when he sat at his sister's table on Sundays, he could eat her stew without scanning the windows every 5 seconds. Not because the world was safe, because he had finally chosen to stay in it.